Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi everybody, my name is Lisa Wilson and I am an alcoholic. Sober today from the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to thank James, Juanita, and the rest of you that have worked on the committee. I know the work that goes into one of these and what fun it is when it's over with, when you get to breathe. Mary Helen, you said when you first opened up the other night, and you blew my mind off with the 24 hours that you had in the program. And when James asked me, I said, sure, they need to hear what I want to say. And I said, James, I can't do that. You know, I just can't do that. And he said, why not? And I've never said no to Alcoholics Anonymous, and with my sponsor standing there and another one that has traveled the roads with me, Pat, she looked at me and she said, what? I said, because I fall off stages, you know, gracefully, and I turn a nice color of red, I was told. The journey. Terry mentioned several things. My home group is New Warrington Group in Pensacola, Florida. And I came to that group approximately on November the 11th. We did visit it while we were in the Rooms of Discovery, a treatment center. And in those Rooms of Discovery, they talked about the Rooms of Recovery. And they would take us to different meetings around Gulf Breeze and Pensacola and Ensley. And I felt more comfortable at New Warrington than I did any other place. And I couldn't tell you why that was at first. But I think it's because they had two poles in the meeting rooms, and the chairs sat there, and I could sit by that pole, and he couldn't see me. So I knew he would never call on me. I was safe, and I was safe with the people that were around me at the time. What a blessing, but it didn't start out that way. You know, I come from a family of 7 children. I'm the second oldest. I'm currently the oldest, as my older brother passed away a couple years ago as a direct result of this illness. I wasn't to be his messenger. So I know he's up there with the angels flying around because he had a great big heart and he helped a lot of people along the way. I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts. I am a Yank. When I was 10 years old, we moved to what my parents said, even before we moved, I can remember the week before we moved, a good friend of mine, a little boy, came over and he gave me a kiss goodbye. And I had to go tell my mother I was pregnant. And that was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I got the facts of life talk at that time, and I thought, never, ever, ever am I going to get in a relationship with a man. Whoa, would things change just a few 24 hours down the road. My parents told me we were moving to Hollywood, and I, of course, went to school, and I told everyone in school that we were moving to Hollywood, and they all did little letters with their names and addresses, and they want me to know what stars I was meeting. They wanted to know movie stars, right? And I was the big wig in class at that time. Well, we got on that plane, and we flew to Hollywood, and when we got out of that plane, it says, welcome to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I know it was in the wrong place. You know, right away, I knew I was in the wrong place, and there's no way I could write to those classmates and let them know I was 3,000 miles away from where I needed to be, you know, because I was going to be somebody in Hollywood. I can tell you that when we moved there, making friends was very hard for me. I can tell you I have an older brother who passed away, 2 younger brothers, and you know, I was it. I was the girl of the family, and then boom, 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 3 other sisters. And looking back hindsight, I can tell you that's when I got my first resentment, is when my other sister was born, but they weren't resentments when I got here. They were just dislikes, because I didn't know what a resentment was. I can say I lived there was nothing out of the unusual, as I've heard in the Rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous with my family. There was not fighting between my parents in front of us. I think during my whole childhood, I heard them fight 3 times, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning behind closed doors. And the only reason I heard them is because I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. It wasn't a drag down or anything like that. We always had food on the table. We always went to the dentist, and I hated that because I always had cavities because I'm a chocoholic. Was ever since I was a little one. So I didn't understand when I first heard you share your stories. I couldn't be like you. You know, I just couldn't be like you. When I was 16 years old, and I think it was Bodie who shared it, I'm not sure, over the weekend, and we've had some wonderful speakers this week, and I'm telling you, the saying behind meetings I hear is take what you can use and leave the rest, and I'll tell you what, I don't leave the rest. I put it in my back pocket because there's a time I always pull it out. I always pull it out. And he shared about Boone's Handle strawberry wine. And that was my first taste when I was 16 years old. Some of us got, I don't even know how we got the bottles, but, and as in Bill's stories, it says, I had arrived. I had arrived. And I can tell you within that 2 years, from just being over 15 till being over almost 17, I drank. And I didn't drink every day and I didn't drink every weekend, but I can tell you every time, looking hindsight, I picked up a drink, I always wanted more. And I always managed to get more. My dad had a nice little cabinet up there with full bottles of liquor, which I can't understand today, you know. Bring it out when company comes or something and have a little sip here, a little sip there. He did drink beer, but not to the excess. So I could always get a little bit more. And someone talked about filling water or something in another bottle. I used to put water in my dad's whiskey. So, you know, just so I could get more and he could get less. And I can tell you, being a good little Catholic girl, I'm one of those CIA people, Catholic Irish alcoholics, and raised that way, and my mother was a very devout Catholic. And at 17, and I think we had a little bit more than that Strawberry Hill wine, I was to discover hard liquor. And that night I ended up in places I didn't need to be, with someone I didn't need to be with, and didn't want to be with, as a matter of fact. So in order to get through to the next day, I had to have some more to drink, because I couldn't believe I did that. All I could think about is the things that my parents had told me growing up, and about morals, and how your body is a temple, yada, 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 and how I just blew it, and the guilt and the shame and the remorse. Now I can say, as growing up, I was not a perfect little angel. I can remember stealing my first piece of candy at 5 years old. My grandmother was French-Canadian. She was the only grandmother I had alive at that time. And when I'd go over to her house, she'd lived on the second story across from a little store, and she used to speak in French-Canadian, and she'd get on the phone, and I'd just stand there and look at her. So she'd give me a penny to get me out of her face, I'm sure, and I'd walk across the street, and she'd watch me, and I'd get a piece of candy, but you know, a piece of candy was not enough for me. I always wanted more. And that was to be on my conscience, and I would think of that from time to time over the years as I was growing up. And of course, pilfering other little things, be it time from people, stealing little things out of people's houses, a doll from a friend and hiding it, and then breaking all the legs and arms off, go figure, you know, to make it right. And it never made it right. So at 17 and a half years old, I would do what any good Catholic girl would do, lost her morals, and I became pregnant before I got married. And I didn't know how in the world I was going to tell my mom and my dad. I can remember going to the bedroom with my mom, and I said, we need to talk. And she said, okay, what's the problem? And I said, I'm pregnant. And the only thing my mom said to me is, I hope you give that baby a name. And so this man, who I did not love, didn't know that well, agreed to marry me. We went over and he met my dad. I knew this man for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And he decided at that time that he thought we needed to get out of South Florida and Fort Lickerdale. I understand it's called Fort Lauderdale today, but it was Fort Lickerdale back at that time, and moved to West by God, Virginia. So when Steve talked about white lightning, my mouth watered last night, you know, because I remember that. And it was party time up there. They just didn't have nightly parties or weekend, or for one night during the weekend. A party started up there in the mountains on Friday night and would end Sunday. And I can tell you that those first couple parties we went to until after November, when my first son was born, I did not drink. I did not drink. But I can tell you, when he was 2 weeks old and we went to that first mountain party, I could put that white lightning down. And I was going to show those men I could drink just as much, if not more, than they could. And I could. And that was some good stuff. You know, it got me out of me. Now, you're taking a city girl from Worcester, Massachusetts, to Hollywood, Florida, to West by God, Virginia, where they have outhouses, cook on wood-cooked stoves, hunt for their own food, and take baths in number 3 wash tubs. And it was a rude awakening. Total rude awakening. But you know, I wasn't going to call my mom or my dad, because I didn't want to hear those words, I told you so. And growing up, I don't know about you, but everything that major that happened within the family. It got discussed for 1 second, and then it was swept under the rug. And looking hindsight, I can remember them talking about an uncle who went to A&A because he had a problem with drinking. And that's the only thing they ever said. That's the only thing they ever said. But you see, I didn't have a problem with drinking. Not at all. Wasn't causing me any problems. We lived in West Virginia for 5 years. I gave birth to 2 sons. Phil is my oldest. He just turned 30. And my granddaughter, who is 6, is just such a smart little whippersnapper. She called last month, and she says, you know, Grammy, my daddy's going to be as old as you in 9 years. I keep on telling her I'm 39. I said, I know, honey, isn't that wonderful? She doesn't know yet. Isn't that wonderful? And I want to tell you about this little granddaughter because it's truly a God thing. October the 24th, I didn't give you my sobriety date for a reason. October the 24th, 1992, I had a gun in my hand, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And I know by God's grace today why. October the 24th, 1999, Elise came into my life, my first grandchild. The same day, and within 2 hours, that I was going to check out of life because life was not worth living at that time. After 5 years of living in West by God, Virginia, we moved back to South Florida. Work up there was almost nil and none, and there was a couple times during that 5 years that we actually lived by the river. You know, we lived out of a car. We lived out of a tent. And I can remember going to friends' houses at the convenient lunch hour so the kids could have something to eat. And I can remember always offering to clean up the kitchen so I could have the few morsels that were left over because I didn't want you to know I was hungry. And that's called foolish pride. About killed me. When we moved back to Hollywood, my husband decided to stay back in West Virginia to get the loose ends tied up. And about 2 months after, I moved back with my parents and 2 kids. That's a wonderful thing to do, I'll let you know that. And I couldn't have asked for better parents with my kids. The only problem my dad had with them is, you know, we had outhouses up there. So instead of going to the indoor plumbing in South Florida, they'd go outside and go into the bushes. And my dad just couldn't understand that. And that took a little while to get over. 2 months, my husband moved back down to South Florida. And when he got there that night, he said, I'm really tired from driving. How about if I just see you and the kids tomorrow? And I knew something was wrong. It just didn't sit right. I had an intuitive thought. I didn't even know what those were at that time. So I drove down to that hotel, and I knocked on the door, and his little girlfriend opened the door. So I now know what loose ends he had to tie up. But I've got to tell you this, I was not a wife to that man. And I only discovered that when I got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. He had every right to go elsewhere. I did not want to marry him. I wanted to do what my mother said, and that was give a name to that baby. My oldest, and this is all shared with permission. And this is called a whiteout, and they're better than blackouts. He had said to me that night, he said, I know we're not going to stay together. And he said, and I'm not going to stick around. And he was to disappear from the face of the earth for the next 16 years. Not a family member, not his mother, not his father, not a friend knew where he was. And you know, again, getting into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, hindsight, looking back, that's the best blessing he could have ever given me, listening to other women when the kids would have to go to the divorced husbands or vice versa to the divorced wives, the problems that they had with their kids. But you know, I'm a good mom because I take care of my kids. It doesn't matter if I have started to drink every Friday night because I need that drink just to calm my nerves from the week. And those were some rough years, those first. Barry was 1 and Phil was 3. Those were for some rough years. And what had happened, about 3 months after he had left, I discovered I was pregnant again by him. And I was due my 3rd child, and here I was with 2 children living at my parents' house and expecting a 3rd one, and I had a little job at a nephrologist office. Excuse me, a neurosurgeon, a brain surgeon. He told me one time he thought I needed brain surgery for my behavior. I couldn't understand that back then. A friend of a friend got me the job. Those were some hard times, and I had to make that decision. And I can remember looking back when I was 12 years old, being in Miami Stadium, and they were having a big rally on abortion. And I held a sign, and it said, "Down with abortion." I was clueless as to truly what it was, and our picture just happened to get in Life magazine. And of course, my mom cut it out and gave me that little thing, and she put it in a little plaque, and I carried it around. I had it in my possessions. And I can tell you at the age of 22, I did what I never wanted to do, number 2. First, I didn't want to get pregnant before I got married, and second, I never wanted to have an abortion. And that ate my lunch for many years, not consciously all the time, but it ate my lunch for many years. And that was one of the hardest things on my mother. You know, one of the hardest things. And of course, the day after I had that done, a friend called and he said, "Why don't you come out and have a drink with me?" And we did that. We went out at 7 o'clock. I told my mom I'd be home around 9 or 10. And at 6 o'clock the next morning, the car pulled in the driveway. I don't know what happened to all those hours. I know where I ended up, and I know who I woke up with. And one more time, I'm ashamed again. The burden, right? So what do? You have another drink. Dad has a liquor cabinet, and he's filled it up again. Let's go sneak some more drinks. I lived with them for 2 years. And I know, even though I only drank that one time within 2 years, my behavior was definitely off. Again, looking back, hindsight. My brother, in the meantime, had broken his neck in a car accident. He had to wear one of them halo braces. And Timmy used to walk around the block and get drunk and come home and fall in the bathtub and put the metal through his. But anyway, we had a chance to come up to Pensacola. This is where all of his family was from. They had grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents and a great-great-great. You know, and I only had one, my grandmother. I was jealous. My kids had all these grandparents. It was wonderful. They were having a family reunion, and my former mother-in-law asked me if I would bring the kids up here to meet everyone, and we did that. And that was in 1981, at the end of 1981. When I came up here, my father-in-law's brother said, "I have a house up here that we're moving to Jacksonville, and if you would like to have it, we'll give it to you. You can just take over the payments." And you know, who makes that kind of offer? I don't even know this man. You know, I don't even know this man. And I thought, oh my God, to get out of my parents' house, that would be wonderful. My brother was living back because of his injury with my parents, and I said, when I went back home to South Florida, I said to him, I said, "Timmy, do you want to move to Pensacola?" He didn't have any real job commitments or anything. And so me and my brother moved up here to Pensacola. We lived together. Well, Timmy got arrested a couple times and was brought to this A&A place because he had a problem with drinking. Now, mind you, I'm sitting at the table with my little flask of vodka having a few drinks and not thinking I have a problem at all, and telling him he's got to stop doing this, he's got to stop doing this, you know. I don't know why I never had to bail him out of jail. I guess he talked his way out of jail. Again, not knowing. I ended up dating a gentleman who I knew through work. I started to work for a nephrology doctor in Pensacola, a kidney specialist, and a friend there had a boyfriend. And I'll tell you, there was 5 recently divorced women that I went to work with. And we discovered the corral, and we discovered down under. Now, I hadn't been out really juicing and drinking and dancing in 2 years, and we were prime and ready to go. And it was, you know, you drank at least 2 or 3 beers before you went, so you just got to feeling that, you know. Then you could get on that dance floor and dance. Has anyone ever danced sober? The only requirement is that you don't know how. I love that one. His arms and legs are everywhere. I was to end up marrying Reese, my second husband. My children were 5 and 7 years old, and I can only tell you that that was totally a God thing, because I could not have asked for a better father for my children, for our children. I didn't love the man. The only thing I wanted was the money and the paycheck. And I wanted a father for those kids. They had gone too long without a father figure. My brother was around, but my brother wasn't around, if you know what I mean, and I wanted to get out of that house. I looked for the house with the white picket fence for many years. I wanted that dream, and I didn't get it with the first boyfriend. I didn't get it with the second boyfriend. I didn't get it with the first husband. But I knew it had to be out there, that elusive dream. So we were to get married and move by the golf course and, the house and all that good stuff. And I used to get so aggravated at him because, I'd need that little 1 or 2 drinks every night when I got home from work because the kids just weren't doing things the right way. Their clothes, their books, everything was out on the floor, and I would say, "Would you please get onto them?" And he'd say, "Phil, Barry, your mother said to pick up your things." And I go, yell at him, yell at him. I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I knew something wasn't sitting right. Those 1 or 2 little drinks turned into a lot more drinks every Friday night. And then from Friday night, it continued on to Saturday night, and then it dwelt into Sunday. In the beginning, like I've heard others say, in the beginning, alcohol was fun. And then it became a habit, and something happened. I crossed over that line. It became a necessity. And I had to have it. I couldn't go without it. And as the years progressed, starting in 1990 to 1992, my realm was to drink enough and not eat because I wanted to keep that girlish 99 figure I look so good at, and end up in the emergency room or a surgical center and get my shot, my IV, shot for nausea and vomiting, and get sicker and sicker. And they'd always call the next day and they'd say, your blood work is really out of whack. Something's wrong with your liver. You need to come back for more tests. So, I made sure I went to a different one the next time. And at that time, there was a total of 22 in Pensacola, Gulf Breeze area. So I always made sure I went to a different one. I'm not relating it to alcohol at all. I've always got the flu. I'm always sick. If everyone would just get off my back, everything would be okay. I need a drink. I wasn't a bar hopper those last couple of years. I was a closet drinker. My husband and my children never saw me with a drink in my hand. I had all the good hiding places in the house. I used to stick a couple little 7-Up bottles in my purse and hang my purse between my dresses because he'd be looking down here for it and up here for it, and he couldn't find it. My husband was an alcohol abuser. He'd take 2 sips and put it down, and it used to piss me off that I'd have to finish his drinks for him. I just didn't get it. I truly didn't get it. But we were not the bar people those last couple of years. And he used to threaten me for those last, are you drinking? No, I'm not drinking. What's that on your breath? Oh, mouthwash. How come you fall out of the tub? How come you trip off the rug? What's wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with me. Just get off my back and leave me alone. He didn't understand it, and neither did I. In 1991, New Year's Eve 1991, I'm to the point now where if I pick up alcohol, I need to keep on it until I make it back to one of those emergency rooms and then get off of it and say the same thing every time. I'm not going to do this again. I don't understand the cunning, baffling, and powerful. The illness of alcoholism, I'm clueless. I'm clueless. And in 1991, New Year's Eve, I got a call from my home. My dad had been very ill since I was in 7th grade and had to retire. And he was having surgeries 2 and 3 times, being flown up to Boston for special surgeries. But on that night, my mom called and she says, this is the one. He's not going to make it this time. So and my sister and I, my brother at that time had moved to Jacksonville. My sister and I called the plane, got on a plane, and it was one of those little jet things. And I'm thinking, she calls me, we make reservations. I got 2 hours before we have to be to the airport. And I can't get to where I hid the bottles because they're there, and I don't want them to know I drink or how much I drink. So we take that little plane down to South Florida. I'm a shaken from inside out. I just know, I don't know what's going to happen. And we get to my mom's house, and they're all in the back room, and I just say, thank you, God. I can get to the front cabinet where he keeps the bottle of liquor. And it's like a relief. Oh, I'm almost there. And I get to that cabinet, and guess what? There's no bottles there. And I start to panic. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I know God carried me through that night. We made it to the hospital. And I'll never forget what that doctor said. He said, I'm glad you made it down here. He says, what happened to you? By that time, I weighed 99 pounds, but I thought I looked good. I know I didn't feel good. I knew I was dying inside. And we went in to see my dad, and he couldn't talk because he had a trach in, but he could still write. He was still with it. And for the first time in my life, my dad told me the words I wanted to hear my whole life, or I thought I wanted to hear, and he wrote down, I just want you to know I love you. See, my dad could never say those words, but looking hindsight, he showed me in every other way. Every other way. I didn't understand that at that time. And he said, you look good. And my thought immediately was, Dad, if you only knew, I am dying inside. That next morning, we went home, and the doctor gave the family a decision to make. And either way, it wasn't going to work out, but he didn't want to make that decision. So we all went home, and Mom got the 7 kids around the table, and she says, I don't know what to do, so let's just all pray about it. Don't you just love it? And I'm thinking, what good is praying going to do about it? My mom's faith carried a lot of us through. We were on our way back up that next morning to his hospital room. We get off the elevator, and they say code blue, and they say his room. And you know what my mom said? Good, God took care of it for us. I didn't understand that either. And my dad was to pass away that day, and the doctor got us around his bed, and he said, I want you to take a good look at this man. Everything that ever happened to him was due to stress. And I'm thinking, stress? Self-inflicted stress. He was a perfectionist. and I took up that trait with him. It's getting better. I was to come back to Pensacola till my husband and my kids, and things just progressively got worse because my guilt and my shame. One more time. I ended up getting drunk while I was down there. I went and got a bottle. And my mom found the bottle and asked me what was that, and did I have a drinking problem? And of course I told her, oh no, I'm just upset. Late in 1991, I'm sitting in my thing was I would have to get up in the middle of the night 2, 3, 4 times to get a drink because I just couldn't sleep through the night anymore. And if I didn't get it, I'd start shaking from the inside out, and I didn't understand I was detoxing. But I'm sitting in that living room watching TV, and I turn the TV on, and there's this dumb little circle and triangle, and I'm trying to see it, and it says, if you want a drink, that's your problem. If you want to stop, we can help. And there was a phone number, and I called that phone number. And I talked to some lady, not right away, she called me back. And I can't tell you what that lady said, but I can remember saying, but you don't understand. You don't understand. That went by the wayside. I continued to drink. And again, here we go, drinking for 2 weeks straight, not eating, end up in one of the emergency rooms. And in early 1992, June or so, made another trip to one of those little emergency centers. And I always got the call the next day. But it just so happened my husband was off that day and he got the call. And it was from the doctor. And he said, something is wrong with your wife's liver. You need to bring her in for a liver biopsy. He got off the phone and he turned to me and says, have you been drinking? And I said, no. You know, because of that threat, he's going to leave me out financial insecurity I don't do good with. So anyway, he scheduled the liver biopsy. We went and had that done, and my God, they took that needle out, and I thought, I don't like needles. And it hurt like heck, and about 3 or 4 days later, the nurse called the house, and she said, the doctor says you have a year to live. You best quit drinking. And that was it. That was it. And it scared me. I didn't want to die. I did not want to die. Nothing else was suggested. So I make sure every time I go to a doctor now, they know I'm in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I ask them if they need any material, and 9 times out of 10, they would like some. It was 3 months without a drink, with no program, me in my own head, and I was about ready to blow my brains out then. And my oldest son, I used to give him money to get out of the house to go buy soda or candy so I could drink. What I did to my children, how it affected, and Sue described it so perfectly yesterday. My son got in trouble with the law, and we had to go see the judge. And I'll tell you what, that morning I just needed one drink just to calm my nerves to get to that courthouse in front of that judge. And I took one drink. As soon as my husband walked out the door that night before, I went and got a little bottle from the little liquor store that opened at 6:30 and didn't close till 2 in the morning. Half hour later, I was back getting another little bottle. Half hour later, I went back and got a half a gallon of vodka. And I finished almost half of it before we walked into that courtroom. And how I functioned, I don't know. And how he didn't know, I don't know. A God thing for sure. All this time, I've never gotten a DUI, I've never gotten stopped. I've got the husband, I've got the kids, I've got the job. I'm not an alcoholic because that's what Uncle was. And Uncle gave away all those things, and Uncle ended up in jail. But what is wrong with me? Why can't I put it down? So we went to court, and he got community service and a little slap on the hand, and I was off to the races for 2 weeks. And it was the end of that 2 weeks when I picked up the gun, and because dying looked better than living. It was that last drink when I realized it didn't get me drunk and it didn't get me sober. I was in big trouble. And I looked down at my hands, and I knew what my hands were, but I didn't know what my hands were. I picked up my brush, and I knew, brush your hair, but it wouldn't connect. I looked at my feet to put on my shoes, and I didn't know how to put my shoes on, and I knew I was in dire trouble. So I took the gun, went into the bathroom, and sat there, and I sat there until I heard the noise in the kitchen, and I knew the kids came home from school. And it was an early day for my husband, so I knew he came home from work. And when I walked out of that bathroom, they just all looked at me. It's a look you can't imagine. You can't imagine. I ended up in the emergency room to Baptist Hospital. And it seemed like I was laying there for hours and hours and hours, just wanting to die. And this doctor walked in, and his first words was, "Do you know why you're here?" And I blurted out the word alcohol for the first time in my life to another human being. And he said, we can get you help, and I can't tell you the feeling I felt at that moment, as I just wanted to die. And it was relief. And from there, I ended up in the rooms of discovery. And people from Alcoholics Anonymous on a daily basis would bring meetings. But I wasn't getting it because I don't know what my hands do. I couldn't pull my pants up because I didn't know how. And they put me in this room with, and she was 21 years old. She'd been there for 28 days. She was pukely, bubbly, you know, just happy, full of spirit, and isn't God wonderful? And I'm thinking the only God I know is the one I've been visiting over the toilet every morning as I'm vomiting out my guts. I don't get it. After 10 days, and they keep on telling you, they give you 3 days, and they say, well, maybe 4, you'll get a little clearer, and then I hear 5, and then I hear 6, and then I hear 7, and they have a plan for me on day 8. And it's called a place called Chattahoochee, because I need a little bit longer. And I didn't understand what they were talking about. Well, you bring that into a meeting when you're in treatment, and you ask them what Chattahoochee is, and they're all so willing to share with you what Chattahoochee is, and I knew I wasn't going there. They also shared ways to commit suicide in treatment, and that's the route I was going to take because I wasn't going there. So that night, there was smoking still back then. It was called First Step for Baptist Hospital. Shortly after that, they shut it down, but I didn't take it personally. I'd walk down that long hall. I got my last cigarette. And I walked down that long hall, and I looked in the meeting room, and I prayed when I was in my room getting my cigarette. And I'm sure it was just that prayer I had said for the last 2 years, and that was, God help me. Just God help me. I walked down that hall, and I looked in that first meeting room, and the steps and traditions were on the wall, and I read, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and I knew what it meant. I knew what it meant. I can't tell you how fast I ran down to that. And I'm running down to the nurse's station going, oh, my hands, I know what they're doing. I know what they do, I know what they do. And I'm unzipping my clothes and pulling them up and down, and they just thought I had truly lost it. But I wanted them to see that I knew how to function as a human being and that I didn't have to go to that place they called Chattahoochee, and I didn't have to kill myself, and it was going to be okay. That next day, I had been there now only for 11 days. That next day in group, and that next day was going to be my son's birthday, and I wanted to go home, and I felt okay. I felt that little bit of hope. I felt something. And the woman from Alcoholics Anonymous, her name was Clay, came into the meeting that day. Now, I heard you every day, and I didn't hear you. But Clay came in and gave that meeting, and at the end of the meeting, she came up and she looked at me, and she must have recognized the death in my eyes, because she said, honey, it's going to be okay. And she took out a grapevine, and she wrote her name, and she wrote her phone number on the back of that grapevine. And she said, if you can, call me before you leave here. And if you can't, you call me the minute you get home, and I'll meet you for a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, or I'll pick you up. I didn't understand that. Did not understand that. The minute I got home, I picked up that phone, and I said, Clay, can you come get me? There was no way I was going to a meeting by myself. I have lost all of my people skills, what little ones I had when I got into the room from alcohol, all of them, and scared to death. And I walked up those 13 steps, and we turned the corner, and some of you know George from Area Assembly. George and a bunch of the guys are sitting in the corner, and all I hear is sick side. So I sat on this side of New Warrington for the first 6 months because that's the sick side. And the first time I opened my mouth in that meeting, I said, I'm Martha, and I'm an alcoholic. I didn't even want you to know my name. I could not stand to hear my own name called. So for the next 6 months, I was referred to as Martha. Of course, the ladies that were close to me knew what my real name was, the ones I got to know. But it's so funny, even a couple weeks ago, someone that moved away years ago, October the 26th, 1992 is when I picked up that first beginner's chip. They had meetings downstairs from the rooms of discovery. It was 2 weeks later I made it into Warrington. They came in and says, well, hey, Martha, I haven't seen you for 12 years. And you know, I get to deja vu because I don't want to forget that. I don't ever want to forget what it was like staring in that mirror and it was knock, knock, nobody's home. Nobody's home. And we sat in that meeting, and that first meeting when I got out of treatment was on fear. And I didn't have any fear. You don't understand. I didn't have the problems. I had been to one meeting of AA in 1991 because my husband had a problem with my drinking. And it was a Saturday night gratitude meeting, and you all talked about how you got DUIs, lost your families, lost your jobs, or chose to give them away. I love the statement, I've been sober for a few 24 hours. None of you stayed sober, I thought. But I love that 11th little step you read, because I heard that, sought through prayer and medication, no wonder why. That's the way I heard it. So the second time, I didn't think it was going to work because I didn't want to do drugs. And you only stayed sober for a few 24 hours. Everything I heard in that meeting, I judged you, and it wasn't me. It wasn't me. And thank God I stuck around long enough to find out it was exactly me, and I was never going to be alone again. In those rooms, they talked about AA and what you needed to do, and that was to get a sponsor. Asked someone else that had been working the step, and they said, stick with the winners. That was people who was working the program, trying to do different. No one's better, no one's worse, and I didn't understand that. So we'd go to those meetings, and I asked this young lady to be my temporary sponsor. And she said yes right away, and I can't tell you what a relief that was. You know, just, they didn't say no. And I would call her every night, and she'd say, how you doing? I'd say, fine. And she'd chuckle, because she knew what fine meant. You know, when I wasn't doing fine, I was just there. And I'd go every day for that first week. And at the end of that first week, a little gentleman named Bill, we have a big tape library in New Warrington. You can check out tapes, and he was putting them together, and I asked him if I could help him, because I don't have communication skills yet to talk to you before. It was suggested you go a half hour before, at least, if not an hour, and stay until everyone's gone. And I didn't have communication skills, so I used to try to get busy cleaning or something. And he helped me get those tapes in alphabetical order, and he says, how does it feel to do your first piece of service work? And I was like, huh? Clueless. Well, that next week, the group president asked me to make coffee. Heck, I didn't know. And after that meeting, the ladies didn't like growing hair on their chest, so they gave me bathroom duty. I didn't know you didn't put the whole can of coffee in one of those things. I thought it was a whole can of coffee. I wasn't a coffee drinker before that. How was I to know? And that was my first, and I was so pleased to get to do those toilets. And I was so pleased to get to wash those ashtrays. And I was so pleased to get those, because that was the only peace I had. You see, my husband's not an alcoholic. He doesn't understand why just treatment didn't fix me, and why I couldn't put down the drink, and I couldn't understand what my problem was. Why couldn't I put down the drink? What is wrong with me that I cannot not drink? And I'm hearing all your stories, and I'm truly not relating, because, you know, it's not me. That didn't happen to me. I listened for all the differences, not the similarities. And my sponsor said it's so easy. She said, because you can't do that. And I understood that. I understood that. I showed up at meetings and occupied a chair for the first 6 months as Martha. I couldn't tell you how to work that first step, but I know I was working a tradition. I had a desire to stop drinking. That's the only thing I had. And I didn't know how not to. And I still had a full bottle of vodka at the house, too. And I'm scared to death to tell my husband. And I'm scared to death it's going to come from where I hid it and get me. And I can't go to the grocery store and go shopping and go buy that liquor part without starting to physically shake. But you taught me something. You taught me the power of prayer. And I would start saying, walk around with a buggy, out loud, saying the Serenity Prayer. And everyone looked at me, and I didn't care, because that's where I had to get. I had to get where I didn't care. And I went back to work, and they made me sign an agreement not to drink for 1 year. Now, they never said anything to me at work. I had worked there for 7 years. And they said they knew, but they didn't know what to do. Now, my boss is a historian in Pensacola. I worked at that time for an advertising agency in a place called Healthcare Research and Development Institute, and it was within one agency. And my boss used to get these things from Waterfront Rescue Mission and Salvation Army on their drugs and alcohol program, and he would give it to me to type up and put in book format, and I would say, he thinks I'm an alcoholic. He just thinks I'm an alcoholic. That's why he's giving me all this stuff to type in. You know, never said anything. Can't understand it. And I was to journey for that first 6 months totally clueless, but I did what you suggested. And they'd say, Martha, I hope you come back tomorrow. It'll be good to see you. And I go back at that 5:30 meeting, because I knew once I got home, things were going to change. And every night, and I'm allowed to share this per family in the long period that we had of reconstruction, it wasn't a pretty place to be from all the damage that I did. The husband couldn't understand why I had to make meetings. He wanted to know who was there and what we talked about. And I didn't understand. And I said, I can't tell you. So it was like a big secret. I did some damage that way because of the not understanding, but mostly because of the not asking you, how do you do that? I didn't want you to think I was stupid, and I had to become stupid. Oh, the destruction. It ended up, I was 3 months sober, and I truly was a shaken and a bacon. I'd sit on the back row, and I'd just be shaken. And after the whole row got going, the lady next to me would put her hand on my leg, and it would stop, and everyone would stop. And then we'd start again, because the floors were loose. They called that the shake and row. Thank God for Jerry W. A lot of you know her too. The people that God has put in my life, and you know, I didn't even realize it in the beginning. Dress up and show up. You told me I had 3 choices, and I didn't understand those choices: locked up, covered up, or sobered up. And I'd already been locked up. I'd been not in the sense of a jail or institution or a prison. Treatment, yes. But I was locked up in here, totally locked up in here. And remember, I'm a member of the CIA, so when you read God could and would if you were sought, I knew I was never going to get it. 99.9%. I told you I was never going to get it. And something happened, because you have all those little sayings. We come to, and we come to believe, and the miracle was to happen for me at 6 months. And I was to go on my first 12-step call. I didn't even know what that was, but I can tell you that sponsor got me into this book right away. And I'd read line 1 and forget what line 1 was when I got to line 2. And she said, stick to that first 164 pages. And would call and would talk to her a few minutes every night about what I read. We. Sometimes it was just we. And she said, that's okay, darling. You just keep on reading. Why don't you come over for coffee with some of the other ladies? And I was scared to death of the ladies, but I thank God for the ladies today. And make it to those ladies' meetings, because those are the ones that you're going to need. Now, I'm still married, right? 6 months we go on the first 12-step call. I get a call from Jeannie, and she says, they're in a bar. And I thought, oh, my God, I can't go into a bar? She said, together we can. And the 2 of us went and did a 12-step call in a bar, and I didn't understand truly what we were doing. And we brought this young lady to detox. And, you know, she's alive and sober today, not because of anything I did. It's because of what she heard and how God touched her life when he touched it, just like he touched mine when he touched it. That moment of clarity that was discussed, when that doctor said to me, do you want help? And you know, he wrote his name down on a piece of paper. And for whatever reason, I stuck that piece of paper in my drawer at the house. I didn't know why at the time, but it was just sitting there, this piece of paper. I would find out down the road why. I understood a little bit at 6 months, and Jeannie was talking about how, honesty, open-minded, and willingness, and the only thing was that I had the willingness when I got here. I didn't know how to become honest, because my truths became lies and my lies became truths. I was totally screwed up. And I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at my home group that night, and I had to sit down and I had to tell them, I said, my name is Lisa, and I am an alcoholic. And they went, so now they call me Martha Lisa. I got 2 names. And then something happened. We got 2 more Lisas. We got a little Lisa, and we got a blonde Lisa, so now they call me Big Lisa. So I love it when I get a 12-step call and they want to meet me at a meeting. I say, my name is Big Lisa. I'll meet you so-and-so, and they're looking around the room for somebody big, I guess. You know, big. It's you know, God works in strange ways. It says we're not a glum lot. There, in that first 6 months, I can tell you what my sponsor did, my first sponsor. In that first month, we got in the car and we went. Just to get in the car, and I'd say, where are we going to a meeting? Well, we'd drive 2.5 hours, sometimes 3 hours to a meeting, an hour-long meeting during the week, and you work. And you'd get home at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, I can't do this. I'm too tired. She said, you never tired of being tired. Shut up and get in the car. Take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. And I was insulted. You know, I was truly insulted. These ladies need to know some of the things that I knew, which wasn't anything, truly wasn't anything. I couldn't relate truly to anything in the book for a long time, but I just did what you suggested. I showed up and I read. And I read, and I read, and I read. And every little problem I had at home or with the kids, I would go one-on-one. I wouldn't go in a meeting and dump, because she said not to do that after I did it the first time. And your response was always the same: pray about it. And I used to say, what good is praying going to do? What good is praying going to do? And you know, as time went on, I found out what good praying is going to do. 3 months sober, my oldest son gets put in treatment. You know why? Because I was giving him money not to go buy candy. I was giving him money to go buy drugs. And I can remember that night he came home and his eyes just popping out of his head, and I said, Phil, do you want help? And he said, Mom, it costs too much money. And had to end right then. We got him into a treatment facility. After a week of him being in that treatment facility, they called us up and said, your insurance doesn't pay for this. Please bring us a check for $9,000 and pick up your son. Instant financial insecurity. As my husband always got a big resentment over me already being out of work for as long as I was out of work. I went to my sponsor that night and I said, what am I going to do? And she said, pray about it and take the action. And the action was, that night I ended up in the emergency room. The insurance should have never covered me for whatever reason. We forgot to put me on the policy, but it did. I know today if I was sent home that night, I wouldn't be standing here, that gun the next time would have done what it would have done. So only by God's grace, a year later, because I took the action as suggested, I got a call at work. And it was the chairperson for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And they were having a conference call with me on the conference call, and I explained what had happened, that I did not put my son in there to deliberately defraud them. And they ended up paying for his visit. You know, the power of prayer, that wasn't a big thing to some people. It was to me. You know, it truly, the little things that happen. And Phil had his own journey, and I had to actually start really reading to the family afterwards, and a chapter to the wives, even though I wasn't a wife, stay out of his recovery, and I wanted to control it, and I wanted to fix him because I broke him and I didn't know it. At 2.5 years sober, it came to me, and it actually came to me before that, that the marriage wasn't going to work out, and we needed to part and go our different ways. My youngest son moved with me. He was 16, a little bit over 15 at the time. Barry's big boy, bump, bump, and hair down to here. And up until 2 years ago, I had long hair, and he wanted dreadlocks. And I told him if he wanted dreadlocks that, you know, it just wasn't going to work in my house, that he needed to go elsewhere, and he copped a resentment. I said, I think I'll just cut your hair off when you're sleeping. He said, and I'll cut your hair off when you're sleeping. And, you know, that was a fear for me because I hid behind it. Let me describe my son's black room. Barry was not a happy camper because of the life he had to go through with a drunk mother. You know, I was a member of the PTA, I was on the ball team, I did everything for these kids because I love these kids, and I'd go to every length, right? I was a good mother. That was a rude awakening. Barry's room, after 2.5 years, came with me black curtains, black comforter, black rug, huck me, suck me, duck me music. I used to tell him I couldn't get spiritual. Please turn it off, my mom's home. When he'd walk by me, he'd push me, just like they did at the house. When he would talk, he would spit in my face, tell me I was going to be nothing but a drunk. Things were never going to change, and I'd go to the ladies again. Can't they see I'm getting better? Pray about it, pray about it, pray about it. And I did. And for the next 2.5 years, I was to pray for God to soften Barry's heart. And I used to tell him, go live with your father if you're not happy. And what's the matter? You don't love me anymore? You know, the yada, yada, yada. And thank God for you ladies who told me to keep my mouth shut, zip it and flip it. How long did I drink for? And do I really know all the damage I did? And I didn't. So I used to use all the sayings to him that you used to me. Barry, we can disagree, but we don't have to be disagreeable. God loves you, and so do I. Mom, you don't know what you're talking about. I was a little over 5 years sober, and I woke up one Saturday morning, and there's a note on my kitchen floor. Mind you, this kid has not said a nice word to me this whole period of sobriety. And it says, Mom, I just want you to know I love you. And I knew he committed suicide because he was that miserable. And I was shaking like a leaf, and I walked back to that room, and on that door, of course, it said, Ann Lander said, don't go there. And I opened that door, and I couldn't see him because it was all dark. And I walked over his bed, and I can't tell you how bad I was shaking. I could barely pull that cover off his head. And when I did, his little white eyes poured open, and my heart stopped. And he says, Mom, did you get my note? And I said, yes, Barry. He says, we need to talk. So I went back into my room, and I just said, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. And I went back into his room. Not even 2 minutes later, he had the curtains in a garbage bag. He was throwing all of his cassettes away, throwing his comfort away, and I'm going, what in the world is going on here? And he said, you know, Mom, all those years that you told me that God touched me, I went to a revival last night, hasn't stepped foot in a church in years, and God touched my life. Barry graduated from ministry school 3 years ago. You know what you told me about that power of prayer? And in God's time? I needed to see those many miracles. I saw them happening in your life. I couldn't see them clearly happening in mine. And what I was to realize over those years is, my God, today I didn't pick up a drink, and that's not normal for an alcoholic. That is not normal for me. Today I didn't cut you down with my tongue. I was the way I used to talk to people. You told me I had to change everything about me, and I didn't know how to change anything about me. I kept on coming back and occupying that chair. My sponsor would take me to detox meetings, and the first time she brought me there, I was 3 weeks sober, and she said, Lisa, come up front. No, she said, Martha, come up front and read how it works for us, and it took me 23 minutes. 23 minutes to get that out. I was a year sober, and at an area assembly, she was chairing a Saturday 8 o'clock meeting, and she says, Lisa, come up front and read how it works. Oh my God, talk about turning beet white. It only took me 17 minutes that time. scared to death of people and being in front of people, truly. She was one that was into service from day one. Margaret was not my first sponsor. I had a temporary sponsor. And because it said temporary, I was thinking that I had to find a permanent one. I didn't ask the temporary one if she could be my permanent one because it said temporary. So here I'm going to meeting thinking I got to find another sponsor, and I found another woman, and she's just what I needed. She definitely had a spiritual basis, but she got sick when I was 3 months sober and ended up in the hospital. And when I called her sponsor and saying, what do I do? What do I do? And she said, let me have you call my sponsor, her grand sponsor. And looking back, hindsight is, Jeannie knew I was too sick and she didn't want to deal with me. You know, I was trouble. I was one of those that, you know, my mind would start going at 10 o'clock at night when my head hit the pillow. The noise wouldn't stop. The voices wouldn't stop, and I'd need to pick up the phone. And from her, I got Margaret W., and some of you might have known Margaret W., and I'm going to tell you the total blessing I've had working with this woman up until this past April. She's been sick for many years, and we knew that she was going to go home one day. And we were at area assembly in April, and I didn't want to go to area assembly, but as Terry has stated, I am the chairperson, so responsibility and accountability, I got to show up. Margaret's in the hospital, and it doesn't truly look good, and I want to be around my sponsor. And Sunday on the way back from assembly, I didn't call Sunday morning. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know if she was still with us here. And I made it back to Pensacola, and I stopped at West Florida Hospital, and I walked up to that 4th floor, and when I got off that elevator, there was Bruce, her husband, and it was just like, and I got to go in that room, and she opened her eyes and she looked at me, and I said, hi, Margaret, it's Lisa, and she shook her head yes, and she passed away a half hour later. I am so grateful that God gave me the opportunity to say goodbye to her. What a blessing. One thing Margaret taught me is you can't go through this journey by yourself because your best thinking got you here. I picked up the phone the next day and I called someone who graciously accepted to be my second sponsor, third sponsor. Utah M. from Huntsville. I need people who are in service. That's what I was taught from the very beginning. From the very beginning, just get active. Trust God, clean house, and work with others. And I didn't know if I had anything to offer anyone. But you know, I didn't take a drink today, so I have something to offer to the alcoholic who still suffers. I didn't get here because I prayed for me. You all prayed for me, for the alcoholic still suffering. My family who prayed for me, the alcoholic still suffering. And in that moment of clarity, I heard it. At a year sober, I pulled out that little piece of paper, that doctor's name on it. And I was working in the medical field at that time, and I wanted to thank that doctor for his words saying, do you want help? I went and got the chart from a friend of mine who worked at medical records, and that doctor's name is nowhere on that chart. It's another doctor. Coming find out after some investigation, it was so busy in the emergency room that night, and he was passing through, he stopped to help. He wasn't even supposed to be on call. Talk about God putting angels in your life to say the right thing at the right time. How many times over the years? And you can't say it in an hour, you can't say it in a lifetime, the things that have happened. You know, we are not a glum lot. It wasn't that I'm not going to live again, I'm not going to have fun again. It wasn't about fun. I didn't want to feel the pain. I didn't want to do the things I did. And you told me I didn't have to if I came and did what you did. If you want what we have, come do what we did. And I just followed in your footsteps. We started off taking meetings into the detox centers, and at 5 years sober, after going to the ladies' regular jails, I got to go to Century. It's an all-men's prison, and I can tell you women, it was wonderful being locked in a room of 50 men and behaving myself and not thinking the thoughts. In that first meeting, after I got finished chairing, one of the guys came up to me and goes, I know you from somewhere, and I said, please make it within the last 5 years. If not, I owe you amends. And I got to carry that message for 5 years until they changed the meeting time. And 2 other men got qualified to go up, took the time. And it was during the day. And you know, I can tell you, begrudgingly, 45-minute hour drive, I'd go, oh God, here we go again. I got to go all the way up there. I don't know if there's going to be lockdown. I might get home at midnight, yada, yada, yada. But I can tell you the feeling I felt in that meeting, and on the way home, it was totally different. And I knew that every time I went in. And I go, yeah, there you go again. It's going to be okay. When I was 8 years sober, things happened. You know, life happens. Life happens. When I was 8 years sober, I was on my way to work, and something had happened, and it was affecting my personal life. And I was going to work, and there was a sign. Don't you love those church marquees? I used to hate them. And then this one said, garage sale. And I had a choice to go to that little sale, because I like more, or go to work and be on time. And I'm thinking, I'm never late. Well, twice a year. I'm going to go. So I zoom down the road, I get out of my car, I get on the grass, I go to the first table with all the arts and crafts, and I get this tap, tap, tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's a big black gentleman. He says, Miss Lisa, I know you don't remember me. He says, but I was in Century Prison 4 years ago when you carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just want to thank you. And I knew at that time it was going to be okay, I was going to be okay. And then it wasn't about shopping, it was about that's why I was supposed to be there to hear that. God wanted to lighten the load that my heart was going through at that time, recognizing it. In 1995, we had the convention in Pensacola. I don't know who all went. Anyway, the hospitality chair moved out of town, so John S. asked me if I'd become hospitality chair, and I said, John, I don't cook. He said, that's not a requirement. He says, we usually just have snacks and stuff. Well, 3 weeks before that, a hurricane came and knocked out all the restaurants on the beach. There was going to be nothing open, so John calls me. He says, Lisa, we need to feed breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 700 plus people. I said, John, I don't cook. And for you that remember it, it was an awesome, awesome experience to learn how to be hospitable, and I thank you for that. And I owe amends to someone who, Saturday night, we got 4 hours and 20 minutes of sleep, 6 of us. There was other help in that 4 days. He came up to me at 1:30 in the morning and said, what time's breakfast going to be served? And I bit his head off. And I know him amends, and I don't know who it was. So I'm talking about getting involved. I'm telling you, awesome. In 1997, we had a spirituality workshop at the convention in Montgomery. And I don't know if you that were there, but we dressed up as angels, because now I think I'm an angel. I had to keep my wings home in the halo today, though. And Big Black Eddie was our little white angel, and we did chain, chain, chain on the way in, and we shared on prayer and meditation. And this one lady said, you know, God shuts some doors. He always opens another one, but sometimes them hallways are hell. And I can't tell you how many I've used that over these years. I'm just going through a hallway, and I know there's another side. And something happens when I'm going to be going through something. God usually gives me more sponsees. Not that they stick around, but you know, I'm going to have them for a couple of weeks. And they're going to be the ones that call me at 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And they're the ones I need to go 12-step when I get off work, and we don't get them into a center until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you go to work and you got a business meeting after work again, so you know you don't get sleep for 3 days. And all I got to do is remember what my sponsor told me, you never die to being lack of tired. I said, no, but other people came darn close. How things change. You know, we are not a glum lot. We learn that there is life in Alcoholics Anonymous afterwards if we get active and just not occupy a chair. I know what it's like to occupy a chair. I did that first 6 months, and I took from you, and I took from you, and I took from you. And by God's grace and the fellowship, you taught me about the fellowship first. And more importantly, you taught me about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and what it was to get active. One thing Terry did say, she said she's been a GSR, and I have to clarify that. My group is a home group of 300 people. We have 24 service positions, and you start from our alternate archives and serve that 1 year, and you go to be permanent archives, keeping the commitment like Sue talked about and others talked about this weekend. And I've served on every committee there. Some of them we could hold that didn't conjunct for 2 at a time. When I was to get to be alternate GSR, I was elected at area assembly, and I felt there was a conflict. So I did not take position as a GSR. I have been an alternate GSR. At area assembly, I've served in corrections as a secretary, and that's when I made my career move. Became self-supporting through my own contributions through the divorce, and got a different job, and I wasn't able to continue that year, but the following year I became secretary for hospital and treatment. 2 years later, you all elected me to be co-chair. I didn't know what I could offer. 2 years later, you elected me to be chair of hospital and treatment, and I'm telling you, what a journey. What a journey with talking with you and learning from your experiences. And from there, and thank you, Hugh. Where did Hugh go? I'm ready to get my name off the board. Okay, I have done my thing. I am not qualified to do anything else. And especially since I hadn't, as our service manual says, suggested that you served as GSR and DCM to be an area officer. And Hugh came up to me and says, why don't you let God do his business and just leave your name up there? And I thought, well, okay, no problem. Well, the tallies were being counted, and I'm telling you, I'm shaking like a leaf, and I'm going, no God, no God, no God. And I got elected to be secretary of Alabama Northwest Florida Area Assembly, and I can't tell you how scared I was. And I kept that commitment for 2 years, and then 2 years later, you elected me to be registrar. And I got to know a lot of names and a lot of meetings and a lot of people. Because we travel. We go to different meetings even during the week. We take that 2 hours to have that 1 hour meeting, and we meet different people wherever we go. There I am. And thank God, you are responsible. You put that hand out. And a year and a half ago, or no, a year ago, talk about major heart failure. That means I got to get up to the podium. I love attention, but I hate it when I get it. I got to get up to the podium. And in my first area assembly, I was so darn nervous, I fell off the back of the stage in front of you. And I got up. Done that many times, but I said, God, don't let me. And I did. And Cushion couldn't even move. He was laughing so hard at me. And he said, well, at least you did it gracefully and turned a nice shade of red. Let's just continue on. And, you know, I would have drank over that before and I would have died. But, you know, it's just part of life now, one day at a time. I didn't pick up a drink a day because I've listened to what you all told me and how to do it. One day at a time, 1 minute at a time. Trust God, clean house, and work with others. I can't thank you for my life enough. Thank you for my life.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.